Okay, so let's just talk a bit about disorders of the immune response. And we've already chatted about these a bit, and some we'll spend more time on in the coming slides. So, organ transplant rejection, that's the immune system that's recognizing the foreign tissue and cells, in particular the HLA proteins, leading to rejection. And this is why patients require long-term immunosuppression with with drugs that they take on a daily basis to purposely suppress their own immune system. Hypersensitivity reactions. Well, these are a group of reactions where the immune system is over-responsive. Okay, so an antigen comes in, whether it's a drug uh, or a bacteria, and there's an over-response. The immune system goes overboard with its attack or its response um, to the antigen. Autoimmune diseases, well, those are diseases where the immune system is now attacking its own cells. And depending on which organs it attacks, will define which disease the patient has. Okay. And then finally, I spoke about a group of immunodeficiencies that children can be born with and then carry on into adulthood. There's certain deficiencies where patients don't make proper antibodies. And with these immunodeficiencies, you have a weakened immune system, making you much more prone to recurrent infections as a child. And often they're unusual infections like recurrent pneumonias in children or recurrent um, uh, kidney infections, something where they just shouldn't be getting over and over again until we finally diagnose that they have an immunodeficiency. And some of those patients end up getting monthly immunoglobulin injections to to bolster up their adaptive immune system. Okay, so when we're talking about transplanted tissue, there's two types, right? There's autologous, meaning the donor and the recipient is the same person. And a perfect example is an autologous blood transfusion. So if you're having an upcoming elective surgery that's months away, you can actually have blood removed from yourself, and they can store it in the blood bank in case you need it during the surgery. Okay, so that's an autologous blood transfusion. An allogenic transplant is receiving an organ from a donor. So an allogenic blood transfusion would be a transfusion from a donor to the recipient. And that would go for any transplanted organ, right? So a kidney transplant is typically allogenic. Now, what's going to decide the degree of rejection or the potential for rejection are the HLA antigens that are on the transplanted tissue, right? So whenever someone's having an organ transplant, it's very important for the medical team to get the closest match possible of the HLA proteins, right? So that's why you have HLA matching when someone's having an organ transplant, to get the closest match as possible to avoid potential rejection. But no matter how close you get to a match in terms of the organ tissue and the recipient's tissue, they're still going to need some degree of immunosuppression unless, as I mentioned, it's identical tissue from a twin. Okay, so let's look at the different types of transplant rejection. and the speed with which the rejection occurs. So hyperacute is a very fast rejection following an organ transplantation, and that's usually due to significant HLA incompatibility, right? So there's circulating antibodies that directly react with the transplanted organ, the graft, leading to rejection. What about acute? Well, that's often months following transplant, and it's exposure of the transplant to the immune system that then leads to T cells directly harming the transplanted tissue. And finally, chronic, which is a very slow, progressive rejection. And that's typically the blood vessels that are in the transplanted tissue are getting damaged, leading to gradual loss of organ function. Okay, so if the blood vessels are damaged to, say, a kidney, then the supply of blood is going to be diminished, and finally the kidneys will die. Okay, so hyperacute, usually antibodies. Acute, it's the adaptive immune T cells, and chronic, usually from damaged blood vessels over the span of years. Okay, this slide is just basically showing the same information in a different way. So hyperacute is from the humoral immune system, those B cells making antibodies that directly attack the transplanted tissue. Acute rejection is that cellular immunity, the T cells that take weeks to months to realize that, yes, they want to destroy this tissue and lead to acute rejection. And then finally, chronic rejection from a variety of causes, but one of the most common is just damage to the blood supply to the transplanted organ.